Welcome everyone to Nerd of the Rings. We've got some news on the Hunt for Gollum front. The new Lord of the Rings movie that's coming out in a little less than 2 years, actually, at this point. TheOneRing.net, our friends over there, as well as our friends at Knights Edge Media, are reporting that they've got the synopsis for the film. So this is not like a confirmed official release from Warner Brothers. I should say that up front. These are fan pages that are reporting that this is the synopsis. So take all this with whatever size grain of salt you wish, but we're gonna pour over this. It confirms some things that we had assumed about this film, gives us some breadcrumbs about some other bits. So we're gonna go through this kind of line by line, section by section, and kind of hash this out and give some thoughts. I want to hear your thoughts in the comments as well, obviously. But let's just read through it right off the top here, and then we'll break it down. So the synopsis reads: Before the Fellowship, one creature's obsession holds the key to Middle Earth's survival or its demise. In The Lord of the Rings, The Hunt for Gollum, we meet young Smeagol, an outsider drawn to trinkets and mischief long before the One Ring consumed him and began his tragic descent into the tortured, deceitful creature Gollum. With the ring lost and carried away by Bilbo Baggins, Gollum finds himself compelled to leave his cage in search of it. Gandalf the Grey calls upon Aragorn, still known as the Ranger Strider, to track the elusive creature whose knowledge of the whereabouts of the ring could tip the balance toward the Dark Lord Sauron. In the shadowed time between Bilbo's birthday party disappearance and the Fellowship's formation, this perilous journey through Middle-earth's darkest corners reveals untold truths, tests the resolve of its future king, and explores the fractured soul and backstory of Gollum, one of Tolkien's most enigmatic characters. And then obviously we see the release is winter 2027. I think a lot of us are assuming that's going to be December 2027. That's when all the other Middle Earth films have been released. So that seems like a reasonable guess on our part. And then there's a little bit more on a second slide we'll get to in a minute. But it goes over the fact that this is directed by Andy Serkis, who of course plays Gollum, produced by Peter Jackson, and written by Fran Walsh and Philippa Boyens. Obviously, this is the creative team behind The Lord of the Rings, the Oscar-winning trilogy, as the synopsis points out. And it also says this live-action movie bridges the beloved films with new characters, returning heroes, and a deeply engaging origin story that resets the stage for and changes everything you know about the legendary Lord of the Rings trilogy. Now, let's go back to the first page here of our synopsis, and I'm just going to go through this kind of line by line and see what we can glean from this, if anything. And again, this is all, I'm gonna give my hypothetical thoughts on what is an unofficial synopsis. So take that for what you will. Okay, so before the Fellowship, one creature's obsession holds the key to Middle Earth survival or its demise. Spoiler alert, it will survive. For those um, familiar with the Lord of the Rings, we know Middle Earth's going to be all right, but they have to make it sound super epic. So now I say that jokingly, but it is kind of a challenge, when prequels come out that strongly tie into a main franchise. We obviously have to care about the story in this film. Even though we know the fates of Gollum and Aragorn and the Ring and Sauron and Middle Earth, they're gonna have to present us with a compelling story that we care about in its own right. That's the story side. I think this is more on the marketing side. I do think sometimes marketing studios can kind of overplay their hand and make it sound like, oh, this is the fate of the world that's at stake, when we already know the outcome. Like, it's kind of like you think back to like the Star Wars prequels, and it's like we know Anakin's going to become Darth Vader. And I think, on a tangent here, I think the prequels, they kind of get rose tinted glasses as they're looked at now, because Clone Wars did a lot of heavy lifting on the actual arc of Anakin that isn't in the actual films. But that's an aside. So yeah, I'm curious to see how Warner Brothers markets this. We already know the fate of Middle Earth, so I'm very curious to see how heavily they go fate of Middle Earth. I think it's much more compelling to hear about, the challenges that Aragorn faces, or the way Gollum is shaped, that kind of thing. Um, anyway, so let's proceed on. In the Lord of the Rings: The Hunt for Gollum, we meet young Smeagol, an outsider drawn to trinkets and mischief, long before the One Ring consumed him and began his tragic descent into the tortured, deceitful creature Gollum. Now, this is an interesting bit here because this kind of seems to confirm some rumors that we've heard here in recent weeks, that there's casting currently underway for a young Gollum, like a young Smeagol, I should say. This is before he becomes Gollum. Like child age, like think like a fairly little kid, not just teenage Gollum. Like we're talking pre-teen, like 8 years old or what, that's what I'm envisioning in my head, like 6, 8 years old, something fairly young child. And so if you were wondering, how much of Gollum's pre-ring life we know about from the books, it's not a whole lot, but we do know some things, like he is a Stoor hobbit. He lived along the Anduin River near the Gladden Fields. That's, close to where Isildur lost the ring. That's how he and Deagle find it. But Tolkien does give us a few glimpses of his early life, actually in the pages of The Hobbit, and as a result of the riddles in the dark, specifically with Bilbo. Gollum's reminded of a few things through those riddles, of things from his young life, from his childhood. Like he remembers his grandmother, and it says, he taught her how to suck eggs, and these were eggs that he had stolen from nests. That's where we get eggs when he figures out that riddle. And this is expanded upon in The Lord of the Rings, specifically the chapter "The Shadow of the Past." That's where Gandalf is explaining things to Frodo and telling him some things about Gollum. And this is actually where in the books we get that, the iconic, you know, "So do all who live to see such times," and, the pity of Bilbo may rule the fate of many. That's was moved to Moria in the films. That's in Bag End in the books. But in that chapter, Gandalf also explains that a bit about Smeagol's backstory, and that he had a grandmother, and she was like a stern matriarch of the Stoor hobbits in that area. So all this to say, we do get some hints. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if we're getting young Bilbo, if he's interacting with his stern grandmother in this portion of the film. Curious to see how much runtime of the film ends up being young Smeagol, or if this is just, you know, flashbacks that we get, here and there to give us some context about his life. So presumably, we're going to see at least a little bit of his life as Smeagol pre killing of Deagle and taking the ring. I actually think it could be an interesting thing to see him immediately after taking the ring. Like in Return of the King, you'll recall they show him killing Deagle, taking the ring, and then it kind of cuts forward to him being cast out by the other hobbits. And we get hints that he acts pretty creepy with the ring to warrant being kicked out by the other hobbits. So I wonder if we'll see some of that period as well. The next line here we have: with the ring lost and carried away by Bilbo Baggins, Gollum finds himself compelled to leave his cave in search of it. So this, fast forward us to the Hobbit timeline. Bilbo has left. We end with him, declaring, "We hate it forever." That bit where Bilbo makes off with the ring. It actually takes him like a few years to work up the courage to leave the mountain. So then he goes on search and kind of tracks Bilbo's trail, which is obviously going cold. It's been, a couple of years. Um, and as far as Gollum's story goes, I think this could be one of the most interesting portions for this film to portray. He retraces much of Bilbo's steps. He even goes to Dale, which, coincidentally, this is where he learns the name Shire. So, in the films, I believe Bilbo mentions Shire, says he's Bilbo Baggins of the Shire in the riddles. But in the books, he never says the Shire during Riddles in the Dark. And fun fact, if that's not crazy enough for you, this is gonna blow your mind. The Shire is never mentioned in the pages of The Hobbit. Go ahead, search your digital edition, page through your physical edition. You won't find it. It's never referred to as the Shire in the pages of The Hobbit. You won't find it there. So in the books, Gollum finds out the name Shire because he's spying on people in Dale, and, like, there's rumors and people talk about Bilbo. It's like this famous hobbit who came and, had these adventures in their area. So that's where that's where Gollum learns, the name Shire. So anyway, this is confirmation that we're gonna see Gollum in these years between The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, searching for Bilbo. And I'm really curious how dark these are going to go. If you've watched my video on the life of Gollum, you will know there's some very disturbing rumors about this character during this time. Gandalf tells us in Lord of the Rings that the men of Mirkwood, the Woodmen is what they're called, they whisper about, it says, they whisper about a ghost that drank blood and climbed through windows to find cradles. So, pretty grim stuff. Like, are we gonna get Gollum eating human children? Like, that's pretty dark. I am very curious to see how they play it. We can discuss this more at length in the future, but I feel like, the people who've made all these films, they have a pretty good sense on, you know, how far to push things for the most part. Like, they have a pretty good handle on that PG-13 realm that they've lived in for these 6 films. And it's been quite successful tonally, I think, across all the films. Um, they don't push it too far. So if I had to guess, we're not gonna see that depicted. We might hear rumor of it. I think that these illusions and rumors and whispers. This is something that builds, the aura around Gollum more than actually showing it. Like, showing it, I feel like would be too much. But if we hear Woodman and Gandalf hearing these rumors, or Aragorn hearing these rumors, it kind of builds the suspense for Gollum in a way that I think could be really compelling. And, Tolkien, that's how Tolkien did it. And it works quite well, especially, you think back to reading Fellowship of the Ring, like it builds up the character of Gollum in a threatening, just dark way very effectively. So I think that could be a really good call to take that same approach. Moving on to our middle paragraph here. Gandalf the Grey calls upon Aragorn, still known as the Ranger Strider, to track the elusive creature whose knowledge of the whereabouts of the ring could tip the balance toward the Dark Lord Sauron. So here's the other major players in this film, as far as we know: Gandalf and Aragorn. I still think that Aragorn's story is the one that would be the most amazing to see told in an adaptation of, like, the legacy characters, you could say, like, of the characters from the Lord of the Rings. He's 87 years old when we meet him in Lord of the Rings, when he shows up in Bree, and he's got a lot of cool story beats behind that. And if you're not familiar, if you want to dive really deep, definitely check out my full video on the life of Aragorn. His parents, like, from the very beginning, when he's just 2 years old and his father's killed and his mother has to, like, rush him away to be fostered by Elrond. Like, he's just got such an amazing story. And even his post Lord of the Rings story, the tale of Aragorn and Arwen from the appendices. I always say it. It's one of Tolkien's most beautiful writings. If you read nothing else from the appendices, go read the tale of Aragorn and Arwen. It's amazing. Um, but as far as Aragorn's past, we know that he served with the Rohirrim, he served in Gondor, he has a full-on, naval battle, essentially with the Corsairs. I remember way back, I can't even tell you the year now, but when Amazon acquired the rights to Lord of the Rings, I remember there was rumors that one of the pitches, which I think has been confirmed, I can't remember for sure, but it was always a rumor that one of the pitches was a young Aragorn series. And I don't know how much of that time frame, like of how much of Aragorn's past is going to be in this film. But I'm still holding out that we'll get some good young Aragorn stuff in here. Um, and whether or not we get like the full Aragorn with the Rohirrim, Aragorn with Gondor, and all that in this, maybe not as much. Maybe they're not going to dive into Aragorn's past. Either way, I hope that if it's not in this, I hope there's a future film. Who knows? Maybe even a video game. Like I think that would be a really cool video game to play as young Aragorn and go through those adventures. Um, I just think that's of the Fellowship characters, he's got a rich background, and it'd be really cool to see. I hope that this is as much an Aragorn movie as it is a Gollum movie, to be honest. I've always said that. I'm still holding out hope. Um, anyway, moving on to the next portion here. Set in the shadowed time between Bilbo's birthday party disappearance and the Fellowship's formation, this perilous journey through Middle-earth's darkest corners reveals untold truths, tests the resolve of its future king, and explores the fractured soul and backstory of Gollum, one of Tolkien's most enigmatic characters. So, this confirms what I've said in previous videos covering this movie. This is between Bilbo's birthday party and the Fellowship's formation. Um, More specifically, I think this is where kind of the marketing lingo. Like, let's keep it simple. Let's not confuse people. More specifically, if you want to get into the nitty gritty of the timeline, it's between Bilbo's birthday party and Gandalf coming back to the Shire and saying, "Keep it secret, keep it safe," because that's when Gandalf knows for sure that Frodo has the One Ring, and so that's kind of this area. Um, Actually, I could see, if we're following Gollum, I could see where the Fellowship's formation is a bit more accurate, actually, because Gollum escapes the Mirkwood elves later on, like more close to when the Fellowship forms, because that's why Legolas goes to Rivendell. That's why he's part of the Fellowship. So yeah, that's I'm gonna backpedal a little bit on that and say, yeah, that's a good description, actually. The Fellowship's formation. Um, in terms of Gandalf, it's when he goes back, keep it secret, keep it safe. But in terms of Gollum, Fellowship's formation is a pretty good descriptor there. Um, I like the phrase "shadowed time." Um, I don't know if this is intentional or not, but it kinda alludes to the fact that it's very nebulous in the films how much time passes between Gandalf leaving, after Bilbo's birthday party and him coming back for "Keep it secret, keep it safe." In the books, that's 17 years, and in the films, it's like Gandalf riding on a horse to Minas Tirith, looking in the archives and reading a Isildur scroll, and then we cut to, like, the Nazgul being in the Shire and stuff. So it could feels like it could be a month or something or a few weeks. It's hard to say at that point. You don't really have a good idea if you're just watching the films of how far Gandalf has traveled just then. Like, we know by the end of it, we know Gondor is a pretty far way away. But yeah, in the books, that's 17 years. So plenty of time for Aragorn to hunt Gollum, for Sauron to capture Gollum and torture him and everything. Um, another really intriguing part of this for me is the line about Middle Earth's darkest corners. And I started thinking, like, what will that refer to as far as what are the dark corners of Middle Earth that we'll see Gollum and or Aragorn go to? And I just mentioned it a moment ago, Gollum in Mordor. After he discovers Shire, he can't find the Shire. Like, Sauron doesn't know where the Shire is. Gollum doesn't know where the Shire is. Not many people know where the Shire is. It's pretty, relative to the Great Kingdoms. It's pretty new. It's not overly large. So a lot of people don't know where it is. And Gollum is kind of drawn to Mordor after finding Dale and wandering around. And so that's when he meets Shelob. So that's another thing. Maybe we'll meet Shelob. That could be one of the familiar faces that it mentions. But he's eventually, as we know, captured by Sauron and tortured by him. So I think Gollum in Mordor. Mordor is definitely one of those dark corners on the table. The Dead Marshes. That's where Aragorn ends up finding Gollum and encountering him, and then goes on a 900-mile trek with Gollum in tow. And one of my favorite bits, and I hope they put this in the movie because I just absolutely love it, is that Aragorn crosses the Anduin River by tying Gollum to a log and swimming across the river. And I just really hope they put that in there because it's just such a delightful image that Aragorn would just be so fed up and not like there. How else are you going to get him across the river? You just tie him to a log and drag him. I just love it. So yeah, but the Dead Marshes, obviously that's a very spooky place. And Aragorn finds Gollum within the Dead Marshes. So I think that's on the table. One that I think a lot of people will overlook and not assume is Moria. Aragorn in the books mentions that he has been to Moria before. He says, I too once passed the Dimril Gate. And now, for reference, Dimril Gate, that's the east side. So that's where the Fellowship, where we see them leaving after the Balrog and everything. So he came in that way and in over the bridge of Khazad-dûm and all that. And he goes on to say, but though I also came out again, the memory is very evil. And that's all he says. He basically says, I've been to Moria once. I have no desire to go back. Um, so I think we could see the filmmakers say, okay, we're gonna say Aragorn went to Moria. What's the reason that he would go to Moria? Why would he go under the Misty Mountains? Hunting for Gollum. He's searching for Gollum. And he knows that he once lived within the Misty Mountains, although, much farther north. Perhaps Gollum's trail led him into Moria. We know it will eventually. That's where he encounters the Fellowship. But maybe that's not the first time that Gollum went into Moria. So I could very well see Aragorn going into Moria on his quest to find Gollum. And obviously, he does not have a great time while he is there. I don't think that we'll see him encountering the Balrog. That feels way too on the nose. Like that's something that casual fans might expect because, like, oh, you think of Moria, you think of Balrog and Gandalf and everything, but Aragorn encountering the Balrog, that's just way too big of a you know skill gap. Like that needs to be reserved uh for in Fellowship when we see Legolas's reaction and Gandalf's reaction to the Balrog. But there's plenty of orcs there. We know that there's plenty of orcs. There's remnants of dwarven civilization. There's nameless things in the deep places of the world. So who knows? Maybe Aragorn makes his way down to some of the lower halls and encounters some other monsters. I don't know, but I think that's a good candidate for a dark place that people might not assume. We also get a hint that we'll see the fractured soul and backstory of Gollum. I'm really curious. Again, I'm curious how far into Gollum the story will go versus Aragorn and the hunt and Sauron and his forces searching for Gollum. How much of this is the hunt and how much of this is about Gollum? Like I've always said the title is The Hunt for Gollum, and the main word there, while people will be attached to Gollum because that's, the proper noun, that's the famous character, to me, it's the hunt. The main point of that sentence is the hunt for Gollum, not necessarily Gollum. I think we'll see a good portion of his backstory, obviously, and it would be fitting to see both the good, the potential redemptive side of Gollum as he is Smeagol, and he's one of those unquestionably gray characters in Tolkien. Like, people say that it's just flat good and evil in Tolkien, and that's just not true. And Gollum is, there's obviously just straight up good guys and straight up bad guys. Like, that's undeniably part of Tolkien. But there's nuance in some characters that he doesn't always get credit for. And Gollum is like the prime example of a character who has good in him, but has a lot of evil. And when we see him as Gollum, like, it's definitely more evil. But at the end of the day, like, he's the reason the ring gets destroyed. And there's hope for redemption, even though it tragically does not come to be. So yeah, it kind of feels fitting to play with that some. Um, Again, I'm leery from seeing some other previous franchises, how they can put too much of a side character in the spotlight. The shining example for me is always Jack Sparrow in Pirates of the Caribbean. Like, fantastic side character, fantastic secondary character. And then once they put him as the main character, it's like, okay, that's a little too much Jack Sparrow. Okay. Um, so I hope that's not the case here. I hope we don't get too much of Gollum to the point where we're kind of like, okay, we're enough of this guy. So hopefully we get enough of Aragorn and enough of Gandalf and enough of Sauron to make it feel nice and balanced, where we can get a new appreciation for Gollum as a character, but not over the top. And then the line about testing the resolve of its future king, that kind of signals to me that, yeah, we're going to get a healthy amount of Aragorn. This isn't just a few touch-ins with Aragorn, but we're mostly going to tell Gollum's story. I think, I again, I think this could be just as much, if not more, Aragorn's movie as it is Gollum's movie. Again, depending on how they go with this. But yeah, I'm encouraged by the fact that we're testing the resolve of the future king and seeing some of his earlier adventures or misadventures. Like I said, Moria, not a great time for him, apparently. All right. And then on the second page of this news from The One Ring, we have Andy Serkis directing, of course. We knew that already. Produced by Peter Jackson. We knew that. Written and produced by Fran Walsh and Philippa Boyens. We knew Philippa, I think, was on this already. I don't know that Fran Walsh was listed as a writer for this previously. I'm also curious, the folks who did War of the Rohirrim, Artie Papagiorgio and Phoebe Gittins. Um, I think they were on this as well. Again, like, this is initial promo stuff, so like their names might pop up in later things. So I'll be curious to see that. But our last paragraph here, we've got, obviously highlighting, because in marketing, why would you not highlight the creative team behind the Oscar-winning trilogy? That is like, duh, you're going to put that in there. It bridges the gap between the beloved films. So bridging the gap between Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, there's going to be some connections there, and we'll get to some of those possible connections with this next phrase: with new characters, returning heroes, and a deeply engaging origin story that resets the stage for and changes everything you know about the legendary Lord of the Rings trilogy. So let's talk about that. First off, returning heroes. I'm always excited about, I'm always going to be more excited about book characters and characters who I know belong in the story than new characters, and we'll get to new characters in a second. But let's talk about returning heroes first. We know about Gandalf, Aragorn, and Gollum. Those are locks. They're in the synopsis here. Um, Allegedly, we also are getting the return of Frodo. Elijah Wood and Ian McKellen mostly has hinted at Elijah Wood's return, in some capacity. Again, I think that makes the most sense as probably like a bookend, kinda like how we saw, old Bilbo, how we saw Ian Holm come back for The Hobbit, as kind of a bookend kinda thing. That's where I presume Elijah Wood would turn up. Some others, Legolas has been rumored. There's been rumors that maybe Orlando Bloom would come back as Legolas. That could check out. Like I said, that's where Aragorn takes Gollum after he captures him. Um, and if that's the case, Mirkwood could easily see Thranduil coming back. I think that would be great. I think Lee Pace's Thranduil was arguably the best casting in a cast that was remarkably like, all the Middle-earth films are cast remarkably well. You would be hard pressed to find any franchise that's done a better job of casting than the 6 Middle-earth films. But Thranduil with Lee Pace is like he's pretty awesome. That's all I'm gonna say. And then an original character, Tauriel could show up. I think Tauriel gets a lot of hate. I've said this before. Tauriel gets a lot of flack, and if you take away the love triangle thing, which I I'm 100% with you, I hate the love triangle thing in the Hobbit movies. Aside from the love triangle, I think Tauriel works really well as a character. I and maybe I'll do a video on this. I stick to a lot of book lore. Let me know in the comments if you'd be interested in me doing kind of a deep dive on Tauriel and what works and what doesn't. Let me know. I think that'd be an interesting video to tackle. But all that to say, I really like Evangeline Lilly in the role. I think she does a great job as Tauriel. She's a cool warrior. I'm just not crazy about that love triangle. But in particular, I would love to see more Beorn. That is one character who was vastly underused in The Hobbit. I remember just waiting with so much anticipation for the extended edition of Battle of Five Armies in hopes that we would get more Beorn. And he's just the extended edition of Desolation of Smaug has some great scenes where the dwarves are introduced to Beorn, just like in the books. I love that. And then that's pretty much it. Like he shows up for a couple shots, really, in Battle of Five Armies. And apparently he was intended to be like in Dol Guldur and helping rescue Gandalf because there was even a Lego set back in the day that was about Dol Guldur and had Beorn as a minifigure. It's a whole deep dive other topic, but all that to say, we know the Beornings help Aragorn along his way with Gollum up to Mirkwood. So I would love to see Beorn and the Beornings. Like that would actually give a nice bookend to his character in the films. He's alone. He's like the last of his kind. So wouldn't it be kind of cool to get like a little closure that he was able to find whether it's more of his skin changer people or like integrate with the woodmen, however they want to kind of interpret the Beornings. I think it'd be really cool to have more Beorn. I love Beorn. He's such a cool character. Um, yeah, so I think that would fit well, going along with young Aragorn. I wouldn't mind seeing a young Arwen, and like maybe they'll dive into a little bit of their early love story and um the tension there and him being mortal and her being an elf. A lot of that is played out in the film, so you don't have, probably wouldn't have to dive too deep into it, but seeing their first meeting would be kind of cool. As far as new characters, again, I'm always going to focus on like who can guess what original characters are going to be, but as far as book characters that would be new to the movie going crowd, Eladan and Elrohir are always going to be top of my list whenever we're talking about Aragorn and his past. These are the twin sons of Elrond. Um, we know that they fought alongside Aragorn's father. We know that they some of Aragorn's earliest missions outside of Rivendell, his earliest adventures were with the sons of Elrond. They in the books, they go to battle at the Pelennor Fields and the Black Gate with Aragorn. Like he is almost an adopted brother to them. I think it'd be really cool to finally get Eladan and Elro here in an adaptation. Grim the son of Beorn. Like I said, it'd be kind of nice to see Beorn ends up having a happy post-Hobbit life and has a son, Grim who's also a skin changer. That would be pretty awesome. As well as other Beornings. So that's where, semi-original characters I think could come in, like where we meet new elves or, Beornings, I think would be an interesting civilization to meet. Um, I could also see, like, as far as switching back to familiar faces, seeing Bard come back and just seeing him for a moment as King of Dale would be kind of cool. We know Gollum goes to Dale, so if we see that depicted, seeing Bard and people asking him like, oh, like I don't know, maybe he's talking to a group of children because he's a man of the people, and some kids are like, tell us about Bilbo of the Shire, and that's how he finds out the name. I don't know. This is top of mind ideas. It would be cool to see King Bard. Who knows? Yeah, so that's really it. The last line, again, this is marketing speech, so it always makes me chuckle a little bit where it says it'll change everything you know about Lord of the Rings. I don't think it's going to change everything that we know about the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I think that's just like really big marketing talk for this is important. You should watch this movie. So yeah, that always amuses me. I chuckle a little bit, but it's marketing talk. Um, all in all, this is I think pretty much what I kind of expected. Um, a few little breadcrumbs here and there. I'm really curious. I've talked plenty now. What do you think of this synopsis? Does it move the needle at all for you, one way or the other, on your hype level for this movie? Like, are you more interested in seeing it now that you've heard the synopsis? Are you less interested? Or is it pretty much you're right on track wherever you were? Obviously, we're still a long ways off. They haven't even started filming this thing yet. And it's not coming to theaters until winter. Again, I'm guessing December 2027. So almost 2 years, not quite 2 years. We've still got a ways to go on this one yet. But what are you hoping to see story-wise? What characters, new or old characters? Let me know all of that in the comments. I'm looking forward to talking about this topic more. And yeah, if you want me to expand on any of this too in a future video, do let me know. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Nerd of the Rings.